We've reached the end of our third unit of philosophy, and that unit was ethics. And friendly reminder, if you were absent or need some reiteration for one of the lessons that we've learned about, simply click on this link and it'll take you to the Moodle page. And we started off on the first day of ethics, the 26th day of class, with something fairly simple. How does ethics compare to aesthetics and epistemology? Epistemology is the nature of knowledge. Why do we think what we think? Aesthetics, what is beauty? What is art? Ethics at its core is what is right and what is wrong. Now, some decisions in life are no-brainers, others are a challenge. And ethics is the ability to have a philosophical compass to know the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. So that was a basic introduction. Then we moved on the 27th and 28th day to moral relativism versus absolutism. And here's a list of 16 issues. And you can take a look at them, and we've gone through those. And what I'm going to ask you to do on the test is give an ethical assertion from a relativist point of view or an absolutist point of view. So if I were to take one of these, you could say, okay, abortion. An absolutist view would be abortion is wrong no matter what. Or a woman should choose to have an abortion no matter what. Now, those are very strong absolute principles. Now, a relativist might be somewhere in between to say, well, there's certain circumstances where it's acceptable, other circumstances where it is not. If I were to go to number 9 at random, an absolutist view would all people are entitled to the most health care as possible. A moral relativist would say, okay, if there's a 99-year-old with an incurable condition that takes $200,000 to cure, maybe not. Maybe healthcare isn't an absolute principle. So what I'm going to ask you to do is take a look at these 16 items and be able to speak from the perspective of moral relativism and then from the perspective of moral absolutism. Now, the 29th day, we focused on 3 areas: acts and omissions, the double effect, and the trolley problem. Now, acts and omissions would be the notion of doing nothing. Are you culpable for bad things happening by doing nothing? Is doing nothing an unethical thing? Is it ethical? So an obvious one would be if you were standing next to a lifesaver and somebody was drowning down below and you simply stood there and watched them drown instead of just throwing the lifesaver into the water. Now, technically, you didn't kill the person in the water. You didn't drown them. Or did you? The fact that your omission, not doing something that you should have done, does that make you as culpable as if you did drown them? Or is it a shade of gray? Now, in the legal system, accessory before the fact and accessory after the fact. You don't do anything, and the court of law will say, well, you are culpable for the wrongdoing. Now, a double effect would be, can you justify something ethically for an outcome, even though it's wrong per se? If the good effect trumps that, does it work? Now, I think a lot of times we saw that in U.S. history. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we dropped atomic bombs on civilians. But you can say, well, the good effect was it ended World War II and with less casualties. Did that justify Hiroshima or Nagasaki? Oftentimes the double effect is in relation to war, to say, we can take out the leader of the bad guys, we can take out their munitions and the stuff that they're using to hurt people. Unfortunately, we have to take out a school or a hospital to get to that. So if we nullified the enemy while taking out a school, was it worth it? Was it not? I'm going to ask you to make that decision. Then the trolley problem. It's classic. A trolley is heading down the tracks. You have a lever, and the lever can veer to hit one person, or you let it go and it hits 5 people. What's the ethical thing to do? Should you pull the lever and kill the one to save 4 others? Let's assume this person was a very important person. These 5 people were convicted murderers. Do you still do that? I mean, there's a lot of things you can riff off the trolley problem. We did so in class. I'm going to ask you to do that one more time on your test. Now, the 30th day, we went to some ways of thinking: consequentialism, utilitarianism, Epicureanism, Stoicism, and hedonism. These are some fundamental ways to think. And I'm going to make the argument most people will think these ways depending on the circumstance. So consequentialism is based on the outcome. The ethical decision only matters about the consequences. So it's a form of utilitarianism. Now, utilitarianism is looking at what's good for the most number of people. And a consequentialist would say it's ethical because the outcome was positive. A utilitarian would say, I've decided on the ethics of this situation because it affects the most people positively. Epicureanism is this idea that we should seek out pleasure from harmony and mind. And it's not hedonism. Hedonism is, as much food as you want, as much sex as you want, to basically pleasure equal, as much pleasure as possible is a positive. It's not hedonism. Epicureanism believes that pleasure is what we seek, but not hedonistic pleasure. I can, ingest as many drugs and alcohol and food. It's harmony and peace. Now, Stoicism is essentially be quiet, put your head down, do your duty. Don't show any emotion, forge ahead, and the completion of duty is the highest order of ethics. So 5 very distinctive ways of looking at things. I'm going to ask you to know those 5 ways on your test. Now, the 31st day was philosophy in the workplace, and we looked at 3 different ethical issues in the workplace: planned obsolescence, the Peter Principle, and the Hawthorne effect. Planned obsolescence is when manufacturers create items to break. And they don't want to make it too good because it lasts forever. Buy a new one. They don't want to make it too poorly because then it gets a bad reputation. So they try to find the sweet spot to say, the customer is satisfied for X amount of time, but I don't want to make it too good, so they are buying a new one. Or you make a new model to get people enthused to buy one. Is that ethical? Is that not ethical? The Peter Principle is this notion that we rise to the level of our incompetence. And we advance people because they've been there a long time, or they, jump through the hoops, or they politic themselves. Is that necessarily the right thing to do? And what do we do if somebody who is formerly successful gets into a position of failure? How do you address that? And then the Hawthorne effect is the notion that people behave differently if they're being observed. So what's an ethical way to get productivity out of your workforce? Should you observe them? To what level should you observe them? For instance, should there be a security camera in my room streaming every minute of class to parents or not? These are all the questions I want you to address on your test. And then we got into the 32nd day, ethics as they relate to animals. And there are several industries that I want you to make an ethical assertion. Fur. Is fur ethical? Is it not ethical? Animal testing. We don't test it on animals. Who do we test it on? The meat industry. Is there a certain meat you should not eat? So some people say, I won't eat veal or foie gras because of the treatment of animals. But logically, I have to ask you, you're eating a standard chicken breast or a hamburger. I only eat halal or kosher meat because they slaughter the animal in a certain way. Well, death is death. How do you justify that? Vegetarianism and veganism. Is this the ethical way to go? Hunting. When is it appropriate to hunt? For what purpose is it appropriate to hunt? If I'm hunting an animal because I need to survive, most people won't find that unethical. If I shoot an animal for trophy, especially if it's endangered, most people find it unethical. And then there's everywhere in between. When I go bird hunting, I will eat the bird, but I can go to Myers and get as much, meat as I want, but I'm getting it from a field. Ethical, not ethical. How about the legal status of animals and punishment for abusers? What do we do with those? Overpopulation. In this world that's increasingly overpopulated, where do animals fit into this world? Other nations' treatment of animals. For example, some places in the world eat dogs. It sickens me. It makes me sick to my stomach that people will eat dogs. But is it cultural relativism, or should we frown upon those cultures? Standards of treatment of pets. When is it considered abuse of a pet? How should a pet be treated? And then logical consistency in animal treatment. So some people say, protect the dogs, protect the cats, but these animals, who cares? What's going to be your argument for these? So formulate an ethical argument in relation to these issues. This is going to be opinion-based on the test. And then day 33, ethics as it relates to history. So I want to ask you, how important is ethics to historical figures? What's the criterion in how we view historical figures? Do we look at the context? Is there a universal, timeless acts of ethics, or do we have to look at the time? How can we use historical figures in our everyday lives for ethics? So if you look at history, certain ethical people, they're on a pantheon of the highest people in history. But how do we determine that? Why are some people who are ethical not in history books, other people are? Some very unethical people are game changers. Does it matter to be ethical when it comes to history? So that's an opinion I want you to formulate. And then days 34 through 36. These are these medical issues that I want you to have opinions on. We've gone over these at length. So you can see all of these, and for the sake of time, I'm going to ask you to once final time formulate your ethical assertions about these issues. And then day 37, negative and positive liberty. Now, I relied heavily on this video, so I would suggest you watch that one more time. And, negative and positive liberty. Negative is essentially freedom from others interfering on your affairs. Positive is freedom to act upon one's will. This comes from John Stuart Mill, the philosopher. Now, modern examples would be this guy here, this baker who refused to sell a wedding cake to a gay couple. How would negative and positive freedom weigh into this very modern issue? That's what I'm going to ask you on your test. And day 38 and 39, ethics and politics. Where do you fit on this political spectrum? And these 10 issues we went over in class, what is ethical? Now, if you were a legislator or you were involved in policy making, what is the ethical way to create policy in these areas? And we will go over these in class. We've gone over these in class, obviously. I want you to state your opinion one last time. Days 40 and 41, just war. The criterion for when a war is just. Last resort, just cause, valid authority, probable success, proportionality, and exit strategy. And looking at American history, which of these meets this criterion, which of these don't? Is there a time and a place for war? Is pacifism a viable way to go about doing things? When should we fight? When should we not fight? And I'm going to ask you in general, and I'm going to ask you to revisit your U.S. history one more time to when war is just and when it's not. And then day 42, altruism versus egoism, or rational self-interest. Which one's more ethical? When's there a time and a place to give? When should you look out for number one? How does one determine that? I love this cartoon. Here's Calvin. I want the last piece of pie. Don't divide it up. Give it all to me. Don't be selfish, Calvin. So the real message here is to be dishonest. And then the mom gives him the pie. So let's be honest. When you're helping others, are you doing it because you're conditioned? It's the social norm. Or do you really want to? What's the ethical way to do things? And then we ended with one of the more powerful messages, maybe the most powerful message in history, which is the golden rule. And if you look at the faiths of the world, they all have a version of the golden rule. Now, how do you weigh in on the golden rule? What are the limits of the golden rule? Is this the beginning and end of ethics? Can you summarize ethics just with this, or do you need to go deeper? So I want your 2 cents on reciprocity, the golden rule. So to wrap things up, ethics is a set of principles of right conduct. It was the study of the general nature of morals and of the specific moral choices to be made by a person, rules or standards governing the conduct of a person. It is often difficult to determine what the right decision is because life is complex and challenging. Having a consistent philosophy aids greatly in making these hard choices. Hard choices, ethical choices, you will have to face them every day you're above ground. That does not go away. But having a philosophy on how you handle these decisions, I feel, gives you an advantage over others. So we're going to wrap up ethics and move on to our 4th unit, and that unit is logic, and I look forward to teaching you that. And I wish you a lot of success on the test, and thank you for watching.